Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph. As always, I'm happy to be back with you guys this week, and I have an announcement before we dive right into our true crime cases for today. The announcement is we have a scheduled break. We are taking 2 weeks off. During that time, we will be featuring rebroadcast of our classic episodes that you guys have enjoyed. What we do is we look at our top 10 episodes and then we go back in, we master the audio, and we also include visuals. Now, if you're on Spotify, you automatically get to see the visual, but if you are subscribed to us on YouTube, or if you're not, you can subscribe and you can enjoy those visuals. I highly encourage you guys to check out some rebroadcasts. If you're new here on Murder in the Black and you haven't gone all the way back and binge some of our older content, you'll have a opportunity to binge some of the most watched content or listened to content that we have featured here on our channel. But in the meantime, if you want to enjoy episodes during that particular hiatus, we encourage you to check out our paid subscription. We will continue to upload new cases and new episodes there. If you don't want to make the commitment yet, I get it. You want to see what it's all about. We have over 50 episodes on our paid subscriptions. I encourage you to check it out. You can check it out for free on Apple Podcasts. You have 3 days, and then after that, it's $4.99. If you don't want to do that, we get it, but you can also just pay $20 for the year, and it will be taken care of. It's totally up to you, but that is an option if you want new cases during our break. Now, let's go ahead and jump right into our 2 true crime cases for this week. Grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, but most certainly grab your wine if it's the evening. Either way, we're about to get into it. Our first case takes place in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2015. And that's where we catch up with the beautiful Alexia Mayfield. She was 23 years old in 2015, and many people described her as gravitating. She automatically had this very big presence that made people want to be around her. She was the life of the party. She was the person who would get the party going and keep it going. She was outgoing, smart, charming, and truly her family described her as the backbone of their family. And after she graduated from high school, she quickly enrolled in an online career program to obtain her certification as a pharmacy technician. She would often go around to CVS's and Walgreens to try to figure out what her place would be in that world and try to just encapsulate everything that a pharmacy tech would do. She was very excited about her career, and she was the type of person who knew exactly where she was going in life, and she was goal-oriented. She knew she had to study hard, she could graduate on time, and go ahead and start her career as a pharmacy tech. During that time, she decided to get an apartment with her sister. Her sister's name was Brittany, and Brittany was pregnant. And they got an apartment together in 2014, and they just decided to help one another out, mainly for Alexia to help her sister out, help share the burden of finances. But also, Alexia's sister, Brittany, was pregnant with her first child, and they were close and wanted to help each other. It was a natural transition to get an apartment together. And she was very excited about becoming a new auntie. And Brittany would often go to work, and while she was at work, they were able to work out their schedules where Alexia would be at home watching the baby during her shift. And this was their routine. When Brittany would go to work, she would call her sister back and forth. They would talk kiki, but also that was Brittany's time to be able to check in on her daughter to see if she was eating well, how she was doing, was she having a good time, receive pictures, the natural thing that you do with your sister anyway. But there was also a babysitter role intertwined in their relationship. And on October 2nd of 2015, Brittany called her sister an hour before her shift ended. And as I said, it was natural for them to talk to one another throughout the day, and especially throughout her shift. But when she called Alexia, she couldn't get through. And she began to panic a little bit. She, at the very least, became nervous. And she didn't know exactly why. And you guys know, it's very easy to rationalize a person's behavior when it's off rhythm. Like maybe Alexia had went to sleep and maybe she turned her phone off by accident. And she didn't want to put too much stake into her nervous behavior. She kind of brushed it off, finished her shift out, and went home. When she got home, she walked into their apartment, and in the front living room was a little playpen that they had for her daughter. And inside the playpen, her daughter was fast asleep. She kind of quietly crept through the apartment, trying not to alarm her baby because, you know, when a sleeping baby is asleep, you want them to stay asleep. She tiptoed to the back room, and that's when she saw her sister, Alexia. But Alexia was on the floor and there was blood coming out of her mouth. She immediately touched Alexia to see if she was okay, and Alexia didn't respond, but her body wasn't stiff or cold. And she quickly called 911 because she knew, because her body was warm, that there might be a chance that she could be saved. Now, Alexia was turned on her stomach, and she couldn't see any other wounds coming from her. She wasn't aware what happened, if anything happened at all. She just knew her sister wasn't responding, and she had blood coming out of her mouth. When EMT arrived on scene, Brittany was distraught. She, at that time, got her daughter up. They checked her daughter out to make sure her daughter was okay because they didn't know what happened. But when EMT arrived and tried to perform life-saving measures on Alexia, they flipped her onto her back, and they noticed that she suffered from 2 gunshot wounds. And sadly, they pronounced her dead on the scene. Now, detectives are there as well, and they are trying to process the crime scene. They immediately recover 2 .380 caliber shell casings, but no gun is on the scene. They then rule that this was not self-inflicted since there was no gun on the scene. And they tried to look around to see if anything was missing, because naturally they have to believe that maybe this was a robbery gone wrong. But there was nothing missing on the scene. They noticed that there was a tablet there that was of some value and some keys, and that hadn't been taken. They believed that this was obviously somebody who knew her. When they further processed the scene, they went into the kitchen area and saw that there were 2 glasses on the table that looked like they had been recently drank out of. There was bourbon in the glasses, and then there was a box of pizza with several missing pieces of pizza. And so they concluded that there was someone else on the scene with Alexia that night. They just didn't know who. They had to talk to Brittany, and Brittany was absolutely distraught, having to digest the fact that her beloved sister was murdered with her daughter on the scene is more than what she could bear, but she had to keep it together enough that the police could get the information they needed. And Brittany told police officers that she talked to her sister routinely, as she did every other night, and when she spoke to her on the phone, Alexia sounded normal, upbeat, nothing seemed amiss. But she stopped talking to Alexia stopped responding at 8 o'clock. She could no longer get in contact with her. And Alexia didn't say that anybody was coming over to the apartment that night. But that doesn't mean that no one was coming over. And they asked her, what was her dating life like? Was there anybody who would want to do anything to Alexia? And Brittany said, there's nobody that I can think of, but in terms of her romantic life, she is involved with a man named Jaden, and they seem to get along very well. I don't see anything wrong with their relationship, but she also did have an ex-partner named Emmanuel Felton. And although they recently broke up, her and Emmanuel were still really good friends, and she didn't see how Emmanuel would want to carry out anything heinous against her sister. They were on good terms, and police officers know they have to check both individuals out, but it didn't seem like there was much there with her in her previous relationship with Emmanuel or her now relationship with Jaden. Of course, investigators then began to canvass the area there at the apartment complex. And several neighbors said they heard some disturbances, but it wasn't enough to prompt them to call anyone, and they didn't see anything. And they didn't really have a lot of luck with the neighbors. However, a security guard at the apartment complex approached the police officers and told them that a neighbor who wanted to remain anonymous wanted to give them a tip. He claimed that they needed to look at a person who also stayed in the apartment named Mark Briggs. And the neighbor wanted to remain anonymous because Mark Briggs was a known dangerous criminal. That was one of the first people that investigators decided to talk to, was Mark Briggs. And they head back down to the station just to run his name through their database. And what they discover is that he truly was the dangerous criminal that this anonymous neighbor alleged him to be. He had plenty of charges of petty theft, drug charges, but the thing that really startled investigators is that he had some domestic battery charges. And it was alleged by the neighbor and other people in the complex that Mark had a crush on Alexia. They bring him into the station and question him, and he appeared to be very distraught by the news of Alexia being murdered in her apartment. And he admitted openly that Alexia was a friend and he wanted more than a friendship. But he claimed that when she broke it off with the ex-boyfriend named Emmanuel, he tried to pursue her. He put himself out there, and Alexia turned him down because she was now in a relationship with Jaden. And he claimed that she just wasn't interested in a romantic relationship with him. However, he said they both agreed to be friends. Investigators aren't really buying his story, but there's nothing to track him to her apartments. They asked, when was the last time you saw Alexia? He claimed the last time he saw Alexia was the day that she was murdered. He said that they went to a coffee shop and they grabbed coffee and just had a conversation, and he never went back to her apartment that day, and he never saw her again after they went to the coffee shop. Investigators now know there should be no reason why his fingerprints should be in the apartment because he claimed he never went back. But he said, I had nothing to do with her murder. As a matter of fact, I was out with friends for dinner, and then later on, we went to the club. They knew they had to check out his alibi, but he had one more thing to add in his interview. He claimed that they needed to look at Jaden, her boyfriend. He claimed that Jaden was isolating Alexia and that Alexia was complaining about him when they went out for coffee and that he was controlling. And so if there was anybody they needed to look at, it would be Jaden. Investigators, of course, have to filter through his alibi, but they knew they needed to speak with Jaden. Now, before I get into Jaden's interview, I want to go over the course of Alexia's relationship history. Now, Alexia, shortly after getting into pharmacy tech school, decided that she was just going to focus on her academics and her career. However, you know how it is. Whenever you choose to focus on something, here comes a man. And this man's name was Emmanuel Felton. They actually met when she was walking up the street to go to the store, and she was immediately smitten with him, quickly captivated by his charm and his looks. And their relationship moved swiftly. Before you knew it, she was introducing him to family and friends. And there were even talks during the year of their dating that he wanted to marry her. And Emmanuel actually called her mom and said that he purchased a ring. He asked for permission. And Alexia's mom obliged. She loved him for her daughter. She didn't see anything wrong in their relationship, and her daughter was very happy. However, shortly after he asked for permission to marry Alexia, the relationship seemed to take a turn. Alexia didn't seem as happy as she once was, and she told friends and family that this relationship more than likely wasn't going to work out. She didn't see them together for the long haul. After a year of dating, Alexia did break up with Emmanuel. However, being the outgoing, charming person that she was, she wanted to end things in a friendly manner, and they ultimately decided to just be friends. Now, her focus never was dismayed from graduating from her school and pursuing her career as a pharmacy tech. But now more than ever, with this relationship out of the way, she decided that this was the refocus that she needed. She was back into her books and well on the path to graduating. That was until she met Jaden Young. Jaden was a friend that she knew before her relationship with Emmanuel, and they were able to reconnect. And they quickly started to date one another and took their relationship to the next level. But she didn't want to get too deep because for her, she needed to graduate and she needed to get her career on the correct path. And she knew she couldn't get too serious too fast with Jaden. Investigators knew they needed to interview Jaden because Jaden was her current boyfriend. And when Jaden came in, he also was very distraught, and he claimed that he learned about Alexia's death through Alexia's mother. Now, Alexia's mother said that she called him when she received the news that Alexia had died, and she asked him to come over to her house, and that's when she delivered the news. According to Alexia's mother, Jaden broke down. He dropped to his knees when he heard that Alexia had died, and he was very distraught. But that's not enough for investigators to disassociate him from this murder that took place. They needed to know where Jaden was. Jaden claimed that when he got the phone call from Alexia's mother to come over to her house to receive the news, he was actually working for a rideshare company, and that's what he was doing the entire night. Now, he claimed that he knew who Mark Briggs was. He was a guy in Alexia's apartment, but he didn't know much about him. He just kind of felt like that Mark was Alexia's friend. He claimed that he had no idea that they met for coffee that afternoon, but Alexia and him weren't serious. He said they were trying to get on that path to becoming serious, but as I just previously told you, Alexia was more concerned about her career. They decided to subpoena his phone records and they let him go to check out his alibi. And when they subpoenaed his phone records, they found out that he was indeed around the city, actually on the other side of Charlotte during the time of Alexia's murder. They were able to effectively rule out that he was not responsible for Alexia's murder. However, when the detectives checked out Mark's alibi, they found some cracks. Now, he did go out to eat with friends at 6:30. However, they all claimed they left separately at 8:30 after the dinner ended. And they didn't meet back up to go to the club until 10:30, which would give Mark enough time to carry out the murder. Detectives are now considering that Mark Briggs could be their suspect. They subpoena his phone records, and when they analyzed them, they discovered that Mark had no text message conversations between Alexia that evening suggesting that he would come over. But not only that, they placed him in downtown Charlotte for the entire night. Mark and Jaden are now ruled out as suspects in the murder of Alexia. Detectives then decide to subpoena Alexia's phone records because they don't know who she invited to come over, if she invited anyone. And after analyzing her phone records, they realized that she was in contact with an individual and she received several text messages that inferred that the phone number was going to come over to her apartment that night. They tracked down the phone number to Emmanuel Felton. And through those text messages, they discovered that Emmanuel and Alexia had agreed to meet up, that Emmanuel could drop off a set of keys and a tablet. Now, you remember I told you when they were analyzing the crime scene, they found a tablet and a set of keys. They also saw a text message that confirmed that he was there. He sent a text message to Alexia that night that said, "I'm here." Before they pull him in to interview him, they run a background on him. They see if he has a criminal background. And there's nothing significant in his background that would suggest he would be capable of murdering Alexia. However, they did find out in 2013 he submitted an application for a concealed handgun license, but that application had been denied because he stated in his application that he had mental health concerns, but he declined to sign the HIPAA release that would allow the people over the application to review his mental status, because that's very important when you're trying to get a gun, right? Because he did not disclose his health concerns, they denied his application. Investigators are now really suspicious of him. One, he puts himself at the crime scene. They found the items that he claimed that he was going to drop off there. And not only that, but he tries to get a gun, but he's denied because of his mental status. What could have happened here? This is all a recipe for disaster. Detectives then subpoena his phone records and also his GPS data from his phone. As they're awaiting that, they realize that it's more difficult to track him down, to pinpoint where he is. And when they finally get his cell phone records and his GPS data back from the cell phone provider, they realize that he was at Alexia's apartment. And shortly after he was at her apartment, he turned off his phone. They don't know where he is at this point, but they know that they need to speak with him. In the meantime, a friend of Alexia comes forward to investigators with more information about Emmanuel and Alexia's relationship. She claimed that it wasn't the roses and sunshine that Alexia tried to portray to friends and family. She said that their relationship was very toxic. She said towards the beginning, they seemed to be in love and everything was going well. However, Emmanuel seemed to be unstable in his mental capacity. He would constantly accuse Alexia of cheating. And soon Alexia found out that he was on drugs. And she claimed that when he was doing drugs, his behavior and mental state would be erratic. He would become physically abusive. And it was more than what she could tolerate. She even used the word crazy to describe him when he would accuse her of cheating on him and all of the erratic behavior that came from him doing drugs. And she was hesitant to use the word crazy because she really felt like there was a mental illness there, but she didn't have the name for it or the vocabulary for it. But she conveyed to her friend Constance that it was more than just crazy and controlling behavior. There was something else behind his mental status. And now investigators are taking all of this information that they gained from the cell phone database, the cell phone text messages. They are now definitively able to put him there. And now with this new information from her friend Constance, they know that that the relationship wasn't as stable as Alexia tried to portray to others. A manhunt ensues, and finally they get a tip from Emmanuel's cousin. He claims that Emmanuel was at his apartment complex and that Emmanuel was absolutely distraught, claiming that he was wanted for a homicide. Detectives quickly show up at the scene, and they don't know what they're about to walk into. They've heard several times that he has a mental health problem. They don't know if he's going to create a suicide by police situation just so he doesn't have to be held accountable for the homicide of Alexia. They're not sure what they're walking into. However, they're able to go into the apartment and they find a very docile version of Emmanuel. He is in a fetal position on the floor, and he is explaining to the cops that he doesn't know what happened. He's disoriented, and they're able to talk to him and take him back to the station without incident. Once in the interview room, Emmanuel claimed that he loved Alexia, but he also said emphatically that Alexia was never faithful to him. Although there was no evidence supporting this behavior, it was a very real thought in his mind. He also claimed that he did not like being called crazy, that would set him off. And on the evening of Alexia's murder, he claimed, and it was substantiated through text messages, that he was going to bring over some personal items that Alexia left behind during the course of their relationship. He also claimed that he brought over several other gifts to apologize for his behavior during their relationship. It's believed that everything was going well during the night, but at some point, Emmanuel may have tried to make a pass at her or even suggested that they get back together. And when Alexia shut him down and said no, they were friends, or simply denied his pass, he claims that he blacked out and he doesn't know what happened. And this was his words: "I blacked out. I have no idea what happened during this time after that." He claims he doesn't remember shooting her. And mainly the reason why he says that he blacked out and doesn't remember is because he was on a 7-day drug binge. And that's when he began to break down and cry. He said he never meant to hurt her, but after he fired one shot, he claims he left and he threw the gun out of the window. Now, this was more than enough evidence to charge him with first-degree murder. Investigators and Alexia's family, while thrilled that Emmanuel was in custody, knew that this could be possibly an uphill battle because he claimed that his mental state was compromised by drugs. And then there was an overarching theme of just mental health problems with him that was documented. However, both family and friends, and even the police, believe that he went over there with the intention of shooting Alexia if he didn't get his way. Alexia's friend Constance remarked that he never would carry a gun, but the fact that he brought a gun to Alexia's apartment that night, for her, proved that he was intentionally going over there to murder her. Before the trial began, Emmanuel's attorney went to the prosecutor and tried to see if they could work out a deal. And essentially his defense, if he were to go to trial, would be that he had mental health problems, that he was mentally unstable, and that would be his defense. Now, the prosecutors didn't want to take that chance, and before the trial even began, they did reach a plea deal. He was sentenced to 16 years. And I know you may be frowning right now and really looking at your phone and probably saying, "Girl, what?" But according to the prosecutors and to the investigators on the case, there was a possibility that if they went to trial, he could be sentenced to less time because of his defense. They figured they'd cut the baby, if you catch my meaning. That if they sentenced him to 16 years, at least he would get 16 and not get any less time, or possibly could have walked away. Family and friends were not pleased with the sentence. However, they understood what was at stake if they were to take it to trial. Family and friends remember Alexia fondly for all that she was during her brief moments here on Earth and all that she could have been. Alexia's mother is devoted to bringing awareness to domestic violence in memory of her daughter, Alexia Mayfield. Our second true crime case takes place in Salisbury, North Carolina. We're back in North Carolina again. If that's your state, stand up. There, Kimberly Clark had her first child. His name was Joshua. He was the pinnacle of everything that she ever wanted. She was young, and the relationship with his father didn't work out. And she had her own shares of ups and downs. And when Joshua was 8, Kimberly went to prison on drug-related charges. And Josh then went to go live with his grandmother named Melanie Clark. Now, Melanie Clark's life was devoted to her family. She loved going to church. She was very hospitable. She was the grandmother that either we know and love or we've seen on TV growing up. She knew that while her daughter was getting her life straightened out, she needed to take care of her grandson. And she took on that responsibility with ease and grace. However, after Kimberly went to prison, she decided that she was going to get things settled and eventually be stable enough to allow Josh to live with her. However, Josh seemed to be settled with his grandparents. He seemed to develop a great relationship, a great home life with them. And for Kim, she just didn't know if it was best to take him out of that environment. And ultimately, years would pass, and she just decided that it would be best, under the advisement of her parents, that she would leave Josh in the household with them because he was in a stable environment. But she claimed that she was present during sports activities, back and forth to school. She was present in his life, and she supported him as best as she could. She said that it was during this time she really noticed that Josh was getting everything that he wanted. You know, he would get the best of everything. He was stable and he was normal. He was a respectful young child. It wasn't hard to spoil him. You know, he was the first grandchild. It was very easy for Josh to get what he wanted. However, it was an incident that took her by surprise when her father called her up and told her that Josh was accused of taking his grandfather's necklace. Now, this seemed odd, and immediately Kimberly got to the house and asked her son, did he take it? But before she could even ask that question or attempt to ask it, her father came in the room and said, we found the necklace that he took amongst his belongings. We absolutely know that Josh took it. And what was really hard for Kimberly to understand is, why would he take it? Josh got everything he wanted. What was a necklace that belonged to his grandfather going to do? She just couldn't reckon why he would steal. And when she asked him, Josh never really gave her an answer that she could use to clarify why he stole in the first place. So she, of course, made him apologize and write a letter, and he was placed on punishment. Now, she thought this was just a one-time event. I mean, let's face it, kids do some stupid things, and that includes stealing sometimes. But as Josh got older, his behavior became more disturbing. When Josh was about 14 or 15 years old, he took Kimberly's car and he took it out for a joyride. But during that joyride, he got caught because he caused significant damage to her engine. And once again, Kimberly was trying to understand why he would do that. This is reckless. You got caught stealing. Now you're stealing cars. And he was hanging with a rougher crowd as he was in high school now. Kim began to have conversations with her mother, Melanie, about Josh's behavior, trying to figure out, was there anything else that could be contributing to his bad behavior? But even amongst the two, they could not reckon why his behavior was getting worse. Eventually, Kimberly went on to have another child, and it was 13 years after she had Josh. Josh was the big brother, and she gave birth to Kevin. Kevin and Josh's bond was strong because more so than it was a big brother relationship, it was like a hero relationship, right? It's your big brother who is 13 years old and he's, you know, giving you everything you could ever want as a little baby, helping to take care of you. Their bond was solidified. But according to his brother Kevin, his brother had two sides of him. You had the Josh that would be kind and giving and always considerate. But then you had the Josh that would steal and smoke and do things he had no business doing. And the one thing that everyone knew in the family that was true amongst everyone is that Josh could do no wrong in the hands of his grandmother. His grandmother would always bail him out of any bad situation he would get involved in. That's who she was. One day, Josh gets in trouble at school. The school calls Kim, and they inform her that Josh gave another high school student drugs, and she almost overdosed in the bathroom due to the drugs that Josh sold her. She was devastated. She immediately went up to the school and knew the severity of what could possibly take place with Josh. I mean, his behavior was out of control. And she inquired about the reason he provided drugs to this young girl, and his response was exactly what it was when he stole his grandfather's necklace. Nothing specific, nothing that would help the family to understand why he was engaging in such risky and dangerous behavior. And she was convinced that he was either on the path to prison or death. One or the other was going to happen if he continued to do what he was doing. Because of the severity of the incident that took place at school, he was arrested and placed on house arrest. However, one would think that would help him to change his behavior, but his behavior continued to get worse. He would pawn the family's television, he would steal his grandmother's jewelry, and although he was placed on house arrest, he continued to go to jail for all of the other criminal acts that he was participating in. In his 20s, he eventually moved out of his grandmother's house, but he continued to depend on her for money. And he also developed a drug habit. One day, Kimberly received a phone call from Josh, and he was asking for money. She asked him to just wait until Thursday when she could have some money available for him, but he said he couldn't wait, and because he could not wait, he was just going to ask his grandmother instead. This wasn't unusual for Josh to do since he was used to his grandmother always coming to his aid. It wasn't until Sunday, March 25th of 2018, that the members of Melanie's church got worried. They decided to reach out to Kimberly and other family members to see what was going on with Melanie. The one thing you have to understand about Melanie is that Melanie was a 62-year-old grandmother who was dependable and reliable, and she would never miss a day of church. And when she didn't come to church that day, the pastor knew, and other members, that something had to be awfully wrong. Family members rushed to her home only to find that her back door was unlocked. When they finally were able to get into her residence, they found 62-year-old Melanie Clark unresponsive on her couch. Immediately, EMT was called, and they initially thought it was a cardiac arrest. But once investigators got to the scene, they announced that Melanie Clark was dead. They soon determined that Melanie died of gunshot wounds to her head. The authorities later revealed that there was no evidence of a break-in or a physical confrontation. The death was ruled a homicide. Investigators were determined to find out what happened to this beloved grandmother. And during their investigation, they spoke to several family members and members of the community. And they were led to her grandchild, Joshua Clark. The day after the murder took place, they quickly conducted a search of his house there in Rockwell, North Carolina, where Joshua lived with several other people. They found a 9mm handgun with ammunition. During the search, authorities confiscated other potential evidence that was a baseball cap, a bandana, and a bag with a jacket. They took Joshua down for questioning concerning the murder of his grandmother. He denied that he had any involvement in the crime. However, there was enough evidence that suggested that he did. He was arrested and charged with the first-degree murder and robbery with dangerous weapon in connection with the murder of Melanie Clark. Just a few days later, he confessed to police officers on March 27, 2018, that he did kill his grandmother. He confessed that he shot Melanie multiple times with a 9mm handgun he obtained from a friend. After murdering his grandmother, he took her purse and her Wells Fargo ATM card. He then drove to several ATMs to withdraw money. He was accompanied with his friends. On April 4th of 2018, the assailants who were in the car with Josh while he was withdrawing money were arrested. They were both charged with felony identity theft. January 13, 2021, Joshua Clark pled guilty to the charges of second-degree murder, robbery with dangerous weapon, possession of a firearm by a felon, and possession of a weapon by a prisoner. Now, the last charge was unrelated to the murder of Melanie Clark, but he was sentenced by a judge to 30 to 37 years in prison for the second-degree murder charge, and the rest of the charges he received between 8 to 10 years, and those will run consecutively. His projected release date is November of 2020. So I have a couple of ad-libs about this case. I watched an interview with Joshua concerning the murder of his grandmother. Now, he claims that after he got off the phone with his mother, he then reached out to his grandmother and stopped by her house. He said that he was high off of meth. He was on a bender, and claimed that when he asked her for money, she began to talk to him about how he's not making good choices, so on and so forth, and he didn't want to wait, and he didn't want to hear that. And because of that, he shot her 3 times in the head, and she never saw it coming. And the way that he talks about his grandmother's murder is very matter of fact. It's very callous, and he seems like an outright psychopath. But then the interview somewhat shifts after talking about the murder of his grandmother. They ask him about his brother and his mother, and he reveals that he has deep abandonment issues from when his mother got out of prison and never took him back into the household, and then seeing her raise Kevin inside the household with her. He felt like his life was changed forever when his mother went to prison, which led him down the path of stealing and criminal behavior and drugs, etc. And the tone of that interview drastically shifts, and he starts to, where he was once callous, now starts to get very emotional and says how it's so hard for him to apologize to his brother and mother on the phone, although he may want to. And he starts to cry. And you just wonder, is this real? Is he genuine? And you can see how he probably could develop abandonment issues from his childhood and trauma that he lived through. However, it makes you have different feelings and thoughts about him. And just the way that he was able to shift his emotions so quickly in that interview really makes me believe that he is a psychopath. And he's exactly where he needs to be, in prison. And he would have done anything to anybody for his gain and benefit. So the question I have for you guys is not a takeaway for either one of these cases. I want you to tell me in the poll, what do you think contributes to a killer? Do you think it's their childhood? Do you think it's choices they make when they become adults? We'll have a whole bunch of options for you to choose from. You may say it's a combination of all of them, but I just want to know what you think. Interact with our poll this week. I want to remind you once again that we are taking a 2-week hiatus, and that announcement of when we're coming back will also be on all of our social media platforms. Join us on YouTube so you can enjoy the full rebroadcast episodes that we will be providing for you in the next couple of weeks. And if you want new episodes, join us over there on paid subscription. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black.